This is The Meaningful Way. I'm your host, Luke Iorio. It's one of those moments that if you face, you'll refer to your life before that moment and after that moment for the rest of your days. It can be very often one of the great fires that we face in life. For some, that fire could be an accident. It could be a major financial or career setback, maybe the end of a close relationship. And for far too many, it could also be that diagnosis of cancer. Well, today we get to speak with someone who has faced that fire in a most extraordinary way and is now using that experience to bring awareness and hope to the tens of millions that will face this same fire in their lives. Deborah Dutilh is an IPEC graduate. Her 30-plus years of professional and volunteer experience in France, London, and the U.S. have been in the fields of personal development, vocational training, and dream work. She is an author and theater artist who wrote and performed her own one-woman show, Into the Panther's Cage, in Los Angeles at the Whitefire Solofest, the Los Angeles Women's Theater Festival, and at the 2015 Edinburgh Fringe Festival. Her story has been published in the Chicken Soup for the Soul series on dreams and premonitions and is to be in an upcoming book by Dr. Larry Burk on dreams predicting cancer. She has been always dedicated to giving back to those less fortunate. She is the former director of a 24/7 suicide prevention line in France, and in Los Angeles, she founded the Durga Project, an art therapy program designed to give refugees and survivors of torture a safe place to find their voice after being forced to flee their ravaged homelands and families. Her attitude of possibility and opportunity is the foundation of her life today, helping her strike back at one of life's biggest curveballs, staring down death. Her inspiration comes from her two adult sons, Guillaume and Justin, and her dreams, of course. So, Deb, with that background and this incredible story that we're going to dive into today, welcome to The Meaningful Way.
Thank you so much, Luke. I'm just so honored that you have reached out to me to share my story with you and our listeners.
Well, I think we're in for some fun today because I know as we were just chatting a little while ago, we probably see more inspiration in your story and what you've been through than you could probably ever imagine. Because I know that always surprises you to hear some of that from all sorts of people, including your doctors. But before we get to that part of this journey, let's start a little bit with what life was before. So prior to that curveball that you were presented with over 3 years ago now, tell us a bit about your journey to that point. Who are you? What did you believe was the direction of your life at that point?
Well, I have always had a wanderlust spirit. So when I was 23, I went to France to study French and ended up meeting my soon-to-be husband and made my life in France for over 30 years. After about 27 years of marriage, we decided to divorce. And following that, I moved to London because I knew I could make it work. I had an opportunity there. And I absolutely loved it. It was a total, complete freedom. It was a dream come true living in London. However, my situation changed. And at the end of a year, I realized that I could no longer afford to live in London the way I had been and the way I wanted to. Mm-hmm. So I found myself in a position of making a very dramatic decision for me, and that was to move back to the United States, where I had not lived as an adult since the age of about 25. So this was a complete reverse culture shock experience. And as much as I knew how to function in Europe, I was absolutely clueless about living in the United States, especially after 9/11. Yeah. I didn't know how the world functioned over here. I didn't know about all the security checks and all the new laws and everything else. So I as feisty as I was moving to London, knowing that I could make it work, moving back to LA, I was more like a dog with the tail between her legs going, oh my God, what have you done? What have you decided? So my plan was to create a coaching practice that by the end of 5 years would allow me to build a bridge between France or Europe and Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought my life was going to be like. Clearly, that didn't happen.
and I was going to say, it was a short while later that you get a call from back in France from your ex-husband. What unfolds?
Yeah, I moved back to Los Angeles, actually landed here in the very tail end of 2008. And in September of 2009, my son, who was visiting his dad, called and he said, "Mom, Dad's had a seizure." And I remember sitting on the steps in my backyard, the sun shining down on me, thinking, "Oh my God." I said, "This is really, really bad news, really bad." I was not feeling pessimistic. I was feeling very realistic. I knew that for a 55-year-old man to suddenly have a seizure like this was absolutely not normal. So my world from then on just really started to crumble. I really just, from the grieving the loss of Europe, the loss of my professional, social, everything that I had left in Europe after 30 years, and coming back here and getting this news, my world just crumbled. There's no other way to put it. And so I was really not in any in any position to be successfully starting any kind of business. Mm-hmm. It just, unfortunately, it wasn't going to happen. But at that point, I did enroll in IPEC, mm-hmm. and I remember talking to one of the I don't know how to call them anymore. The people who were giving us information.
Sure, in admissions.
An admissions coach, I guess. And he was asking about my story, and at one point he said, "So, well, why didn't you do coaching in France?" Because I've got another coaching certification, mm-hmm. prior to IPEC. And I said, I gave him some reason, and he nailed me. And he said, "Okay." He said, "What's the real reason? Mm-hmm. What are you avoiding? What is the real reason?" And I said, "That is the real reason, because I didn't get coach training like that. I want to be able to coach like that. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to nail it." And mm-hmm. So it was that one conversation after all of my multiple trainings in personal development and coaching, all that stuff. So
I was going to say, so this background, because it's in coaching and all of the personal development work, was obviously preparing you for things that were about to come, first with your ex-husband and then for yourself as well. I guess maybe just before we get to that part, I am curious, because the way that you said that, and I think it's you said something in there that I think is really important for a lot of people, which had to do with grieving loss. It was the loss of what you had known for 30 years in the way of a home. It was the loss of not knowing what would be next for you professionally, and obviously loss that was about to come going forward. And I'm just curious if you could speak a little bit to that stage of where you were and how you were navigating through that loss, and then, of course, what unfolds next.
You know, Luke, I'm so glad that you asked that question, because it's a very emotional one. It's what we call disenfranchised grief, which means, for those listeners who don't know, for society in our world, there are acceptable griefs. You lose a spouse, it's normal that you grieve. You lose a child, it's normal that you grieve. You lose a pet? No. You lose a job, you're supposed to just get right back up on the horse and right back in the saddle and go get a job. You lose an ex-spouse within several years of your divorce. Well, there's something called a divorced widow or a divorced widower, where you feel still very connected. Nobody other than that couple knows what was going on around that divorce. So my husband and I had in spite of our divorce, we vowed that we would always be connected to our children, that we would always be there for each other. So that kind of thing, a lot of people have a lot of judgment and a lot of beliefs around that because of their own experience. Totally, it's normal. I get that. But that kind of grief and loss is what we call disenfranchised. It's that it's not a quote-unquote noble or acceptable or accepted kind of grief, and people don't fully understand the depth of that for the person going through it because they haven't experienced, and I get that. So you do feel, at least for myself and other people, it is very isolating because you feel like there's nobody you can really talk to about it. So that's what I went through, and I remember, and there's, I got that, the call from my son, and I immediately went into anticipated grief.
Right.
Which is, I immediately knew that I was going to be losing him, and that my sons were going to lose their dad, and that I would be the sole surviving parent. And that's a lot. That's a lot to take on when all of this is happening as well halfway around the world.
Yeah.
So I clearly did not want to fall into a black pit of self-pity. But sometimes you just have to go there. You have to go there, and you have to experience until you really hit bottom, and you go, okay, I've had enough. I don't think, in my case, and for many people, I think we see that as coaches too, that is really a necessary and obligatory departure point.
Well, I think it's so important, and I know the impact of some of this on the rest of the story, but I think it's really critical for so many of us to recognize that there's a time to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and carry on. There's times for that, but there's also times to not deny the pain. That it's just part of our experience. We chatted about it before. Sometimes certain things just happen. They just happen. They just are what they are. And at those moments, if that's the time to grieve, it's the time to grieve. Because you're either going to do it then or you're going to do it later. One way or the other, that grief is going to come through, right?
Right. It'll come back and bite you if you don't pay attention. Yeah. You can't, it's just, I know for myself and for other people, other survivors and thrivers, sometimes we are just so tired of being strong. And that's something that I had to learn. I said, well, who are you being strong for right now? And that's for me, that was a really important question and an important lesson, was to accept that I didn't have to be, quote unquote, psychologically strong all the time. I had to really listen to my body. And when my body says, no, we're not going to do that right now, and it collapses, I had to rethink that whole thing of mind over matter, because my body says, no, it's not going to work that way today. Today it's me over your mind. Not that we're separate, but that was a really big lesson to learn.
Absolutely. So then, if you wouldn't mind, take us through a little bit of what then unfolded with your husband, because it's kind of creates what then, in the way of the incredible set of circumstances that then unfolds in August and September of 2013.
Well, my husband passed away in February of 2011. I was in Mod 2 in Los Angeles at IPAC. It was the best place I could have been. And when I got this call, that was on September 14th, 2009. And in August of 2013, I had a dream. my husband appeared in the dream, and he handed me a picture of a seal, a playful seal that he had drawn. I looked down, we were walking along the beach, and I looked down and I saw that I was wearing his hiking boots. And hiking boots with the big, thick soles and long red shoelaces that were wrapped around my ankles. Not together, but several times. And then next we're in a car, in his car, and we're driving in a big store like Target, looking for the exit. And there was not one bit of that dream that did not hold a very big metaphorical meaning. I'm wearing his shoes, right? I mean, I'm walking in his shoes. He had died of brain cancer. He hands me a picture of a seal. Well, a seal is another word for a pact. As you know, that there was that going on, and we had our pact of always being there for each other. Now we're driving in his car, looking for an exit in a store, and that's like, oh my God, what's in store for me? Am I going to be shopping around for solutions? Will I be exiting this world anytime soon, like he did? And I did not want to go there with my intuition and my interpretation of this dream. And I took the dream to my dream group, and I made up some convoluted things, sort of really in denial. I said, oh, well, he started his business, and I'm trying to start mine. And now that I'm starting it, my inner critic is going, my grandma is going, see how hard it is? Now you know, and you weren't supportive enough of him and all this kind of stuff. And I brought that to my dream group, and they know me, and they're kind of all listening with a smile on their face, rolling their eyes, and I could see in their eyes, I could see they know that I'm BSing myself through this thing. And finally, we got down to the real thing, and but I had no symptoms. I had absolutely no symptoms whatsoever. But ironically, on September 14th, 4 years to the day after my husband had his seizure, I get a massive, really, really violent migraine that lands me in urgent care. And the doctors kept me for half a day, and they rehydrated me, and we were having a heat wave, and they gave me a whole bunch of things because I was functioning perfectly. They said, well, there's no reason to worry at this point. There's 99 reasons for headaches, and you're not demonstrating any of those other than dehydration and whatever else, but you're functioning. So I said, okay. And then a few weeks later, I had another headache, and I went back for a follow-up visit, which I was supposed to do, and I told this particular doctor about the dream, and that we'd already been through this with my husband, and that he believed in the power of dreams to predict illness. And Luke, gloriously, he did. He understood. I don't know if he believed in the visitation dream, but he understood that dreams are just a vehicle for our bodies to tell us something. Whether or not you believe in an afterlife is something different. I believe in it. But he said, I do. And I said, well, then I want to have an MRI because I want to exclude this big boulder before we go looking under all the, before we leave no other stone unturned. I want this big one out of the way. So he ordered an MRI, and I mean, from there it was all history. They saw this thing. They marched me right down to the emergency room. From there, they took me right to a bigger hospital for brain surgery, which I had, ironically, on the day he would have been 60. And ironically was released from the hospital on the day I turned 60. And I'm thinking, oh, my God, like, universe, please. I'm happy for the synchronicities. I really am. My whole life is based on synchronicities. But this isn't exactly the birthday present I was hoping for this milestone birthday, Really. However, here I am, and that's my story. At least that's how that all happened.
What goes through your mind in that, the moment that comes back, you've got the results of the MRI, they're whisking you away to surgery. All of these synchronicities are piling up, and you had already been kind of transplanted from everything you had described before. You're no longer in Europe. You're now back in the States for a couple of years. What's kind of going through your mind and your mindset of where you were at that moment?
Well, I had my pity party. I'm lying there. They had started pumping me up with steroids, and I was joking with her, and I said, I'm not taking any steroids because I'm going to be in a marathon. I don't want to be tested positive. So, but anyway, my sense of humor was alive and thriving there. But then after that, I did have my own pity party. I had my own pity party, and that lasted, it was actually quite brief. Because at one point I said, this pity party is going nowhere fast, and nowhere will never be my destination. So now what? And at that moment I started imagining, I'm probably going to lose my hair. And I said, okay, well, you know what? There are worse things for me than that. I understand other people whose their hair is extremely traumatizing. For me, I said, that's not going to stop me. I said, so how are you going to deal with this? How are you going to live this experience? And at that point, Luke, that I made a conscientious decision that I would live my life as an inspiration for myself, as an inspiration for my kids, who are now seeing both their parents go through this, and as an inspiration to others. Come hell or high water, I was going to beat this thing. And that's when I made that very conscientious decision. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I just knew that I was going to do it. So sort of like when I moved to London, I knew I was going to make it work. Didn't know how, but I just knew in my heart of hearts that I was going to make this work.
So there's something at that point that you connect to that lets you know that one way or the other you're going to do this on your terms. And
exactly.
So there's a few things that we've chatted about that I'd love for you to go into as part of this process, because I think that's part of where it begins, is that you've said to me in the past that this was, to get to that point and for that to occur, it was more process than epiphany. Nobody waved a magic wand for you to get there. It was part of how you got to that point was part of it. And as part of that and getting to that and going through this process, one of the other things that you said was that your identity shifts when you go through something like this. And so I was wondering if you could talk about those components of what this process is that leads you to be able to do things on your terms. And what was that identity shift that you're going through as part of this process, from diagnosis to now treatment to now survivorship?
Well, for me, part of it was, first of all, I had to really let my body do its thing. I had to accept a lot of things that were going to change. This was very helpful with a dream worker who called me and did a visualization with me. And that the day before surgery, the night before surgery, that helped a lot. That visualization was that she had a dream that there were 10,000 angels flying over Kaiser, but she didn't know who was hospitalized. And it turns out that she found out it was me. So she called me. And I did this visualization with her, which I told to my brain surgeon just outside of the operating room. And I said, Dr. Chen, don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine. I've got it all nailed down for you. There are 10,000 angels in the operating room. They're shining their bright light down on you and me and the whole team. You don't see them. I don't see them, but it's standing room only. All you have to do is work your magic. Don't worry about a thing. It's just going to be fine. And I remember he smiled and he kind of chuckled and he said, I've never had a patient like you going into surgery. He says, you are such an inspiration. Now, if you don't mind, I have to initial the correct side of your head so we don't make any mistakes here. And I always remember that because it was my first time hearing that I'm the one telling the surgeon it's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. Nobody's reassuring me. And it was just one of those moments, and the whole experience has kind of been that way, of me learning to acknowledge and appreciate all of these wonderful people who have been on my side helping me. And to go back to that, another thing that I did for my own body was, before any intervention, I still do this when I get a blood test or and I have my MRIs or whatever, I clear all of the passages. I physically caress my arms and my legs and my brain and my head and everything. I clear all the passages so that whatever treatment or monitoring I'm going through, my body has absolutely no obstacles. Even if we know, me and my brain and my body, and so we all know we're in this together. So I have adopted a very personal language. I have never, except for right now I'm saying this, I have never said to my body, we have brain cancer. I do not say that. I'm not in denial. You can see that. I say, we had an intruder. We removed it. We are now thriving and striving for optimal health. I have not labeled it with anything that you can go online and search statistics for and that kind of thing. Because I am not separate from anything that's going on in my body. We're all in this together. So I don't use the typical fighting, battle, warrior language. It's just not my style. I said, I've got enough stuff going on in my body and my life. I don't need another battle, an internal battle. So I just kind of give it in that sense that we talk about, is that your attention goes, your energy goes where your attention goes. Well, I only give this the attention it needs to be thriving. But I'm very fortunate because I don't have, thankfully, I don't know if what came first, the chicken or the egg, but I do not have debilitating side effects like most people. So it's easier for me to forget it, and I'm very grateful, and I acknowledge that. And I realize that for so many other people in this situation, they don't have that, quote unquote, it's been said, luxury of a pretty painless in the physical sense.
There's a very obvious gratitude, appreciation that you have for the way in which you've come through this, for the way in which people have supported you through this. And there's a very definite intentionality that you're bringing to the way in which you want to connect with and inspire others who are going through this in some way. And I'm wondering if, because these extraordinary experiences that you have been through with the synchronicities and the dreams, and then learning what you've been sharing, has led to some pretty incredible things, performing arts and other things you've done since. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that, of kind of what you're doing now and what you have kind of carried forward to bring that inspiration out into quite literally a bigger stage. It's really, unbeknownst to me, another synchronicity or irony, if you will, is that my first solo performance that I did way back in 2012 was based on the story of my husband being diagnosed and everything else, and having that last conversation that I was so fortunate to have with him. So I had real closure on our relationship. But little did I know that last chapter, that last scene in my first performance would actually become my story for my story into the Panther's cage.
And what that led to was telling my story on stage allowed me to really connect with other people. And it's that vulnerability that you have when you're on stage. And that energetic connection, that exchange of energy between, first it was between the stage and me. I remember I was doing a performance and I could feel the energy from the stage. And while I'm speaking my lines, the stage says to me, "You're where you're supposed to be. Keep going." And that was a pretty amazing experience to have that voice come while I'm talking to the audience and then, or performing for the audience. And then afterwards, when audience members come up to me and tell me their story and their story of loved ones and however they're involved with it, and they're very grateful that somebody hears them, that somebody recognizes them and what they're going through. So that allowed me to really step into this part of my life, this new identity, and realize that, yeah, people are listening.
Yeah.
And it's easier to own your identity when you have proof that people are also seeing you.
Yeah. I think that it's a very powerful part of this, because when you come full circle with some of what you've described of the disenfranchised grief, the feeling of isolation that can bring, obviously the isolation of personal loss and losing somebody that was close to you, and then going through what you did with brain cancer and going through that whole process, to be able to come through that and feeling that isolation, to only turn around and be vulnerable and have people not just recognize you, but see you because you are recognizing and seeing them. That is an extraordinary full circle. And I guess in that, what is that message that you want audience members and for those that are listening today, what is that message that you want to absolutely make sure they get from your journey?
Well, there's an anecdote that comes to mind when I was performing, and this was a nearly hour-long performance for somebody with, literally a fried brain to remember all those lines and the blocking and all that stuff. And at one point in my performance, I was moving on the stage, doing what I had rehearsed, and I could not for the life of me remember what came next. I just couldn't remember. And I had done my blocking movements 3 times, and the third time I stand in front of the audience and I burst out laughing and I opened my arms wide and I said, there's an unmentioned side effect to brain surgery and radiation. Sometimes you just forget your damn lines, and you realize that it doesn't matter because you guys didn't know what I was going to say anyway. So the audience burst out laughing, and it just was like this. It just put wind under my wings because I had admitted that I had forgotten my lines, and I said, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I think that is a metaphor that we can forget our lines in life.
Yeah.
We can make mistakes. And if we have the right attitude and we just say, not in every situation, of course, but many times you can just admit it. And it just happened. It wasn't intentional. Now let's move on. And I think that in my case, that instant of vulnerability and surviving it and having people laugh and carry me along with it, I think that was sort of a metaphor for living your life that, I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt who said, live life the way your heart guides you to live it. Because if you do, you're going to be criticized no matter what.
Right.
So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And at one point, you just have to pick yourself up and realize it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It just doesn't matter for most of us. I mean, there are a lot of cases where it does, but you know what I'm talking about.
Well, maybe that brings us kind of to what is the main theme of the show. I mean, the show is called The Meaningful Way. And so from your vantage point, from the experiences that you have had in life to this point, what do you believe is your meaningful way?
My meaningful way is to tell my story and to really give people the benefit of the doubt. There's a woman who wrote a book about having the same kind of tumor that I've got. And she said, I had brain surgery, so what's your excuse? And you can take that in many different ways. Mm-hmm. But what I realized as I read her book is that it's not meant to be satirical or sarcastic. It's that everybody's had something. Yeah. Everybody's got something. And you don't know what the person standing in line with behind you or in front of you is going through. You don't know what their day has been like. You have no clue. So I give people the benefit of the doubt. I approach people. I approach homeless, and I'll ask them if they're hungry. Do you want me to buy you something to eat? And I feel that opening of showing people that, at least in my eyes, they exist and they matter. That it gives people a ray of it gives them hope. It makes, I think, knowing that you exist in the eyes of a stranger is really important. So that if I can inspire people by my story, if I can receive their stories, if I can help people out, and that's always kind of been my personality anyway, then I feel that's a really powerful message for me to the world. It's just, be open, give people the benefit of the doubt, try to look at both sides, and have a really big gray zone. Don't be in the extremes of right versus wrong. You don't have to accept everything, but at least respect that somebody else has stuff going on in their life that you're not aware of.
Deb, I want to thank you for being on The Meaningful Way and for sharing just some of the beautiful insights and aspects of your story that you've been through, and for letting us be part of that journey and for us having the chance to see you. And so thank you so much for appearing here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show, Luke. It's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. And for everybody listening, just such a wonderful way to frame it up in terms of what Deb was just sharing with us is to remember that as you go through your day, as you go through your week, and as you look around and connect with colleagues and family members and complete strangers in the line at the grocery store, remember, everybody has something that they're going through. You don't necessarily see that, but instead treat them as they matter. Let them know that they matter. And in those moments, you're going to get the chance to let them know that you see them. And it makes it a lot easier when you let them see you. So until next time on The Meaningful Way, I encourage you as always to enjoy the journey. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this, you'll want to check out the 7-Day Shift, a brand new online program designed to help you experience the even more meaningful life that's awaiting you. Just head to lukeiorio.com/7-day shift to register.